While his wife was at church for a women's retreat, this pastor was at the park with another woman in his car.
See if Clipwork 2 is available. Alright, you guys have some ID on you?
Correction 300 at Clipwork 2. I'm clear, I'm on the flow, go.
Are you guys married, boyfriend, girlfriend? Okay. Why would you do this in the middle of the park?
3, I copied you at a 42 door. Do you want another unit since there's a large building?
Alright.
The officer's voice is steady, almost polite. Do you have any ID on you? There's a pause. Too long. Fabric shifts. A door creaks. In the tight frame of a body camera, a man fumbles to pull himself together, eyes darting, breath uneven. This isn't a dark alley or a traffic stop gone wrong. This is a quiet public park in the middle of the day. And the man standing there, caught mid-act in the back of a car, is someone people trusted to lead them. Authority and vulnerability collide in seconds. The badge doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. The silence does all the work. A question lands, hangs in the air, and exposes just how fast a reputation can collapse when there's nowhere to hide and nowhere to look, but straight into a lens that never blinks. A man known for preaching righteousness is suddenly negotiating with reality, pants half fixed, dignity already gone. No sermon, no pulpit, just procedure. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles and tell us where you're watching from around the world. Stories like this are judged differently depending on where you stand, because this moment didn't end with a citation or a quiet walk away. What followed split loyalties, tested faith, and fractured a name in ways no sermon could repair. And the most unexpected response came from the one person everyone was waiting to hear from. The camera is already rolling when the officer steps closer. There's no rush in his stride, no edge in his voice, just routine. The lens catches the small details first. A car parked where it shouldn't be, doors slightly ajar, movement inside that stops the second authority arrives. Do you have any ID on you? Another pause. This one stretches, the kind that exposes everything without a single word being spoken. Inside the vehicle, clothing shifts awkwardly. A man straightens up, tugging at what should already be in place. His movements aren't frantic, but they aren't calm either. Measured in that way people get when they're trying to regain control they've already lost. The officer doesn't react. He waits. The woman's voice comes next, quieter, explaining that her ID is in another car across the park. The explanation doesn't change the scene, it only confirms it. In a public space, during daylight hours, 2 adults were caught doing something there was no reasonable way to explain away. Then comes the question that seals the moment. Are you two married? The answer is quick. Too quick. Boyfriend and girlfriend. That's when the reversal completes itself. Just minutes earlier, this man held the kind of authority that comes with respect, someone used to speaking while others listened. Now he's standing half-dressed while someone else decides what happens next. There's no anger from the officer, no lecture, just facts, calmly stated. Public area, sexual conduct, an offense that can't be ignored. From the officer's perspective, there's nothing to weigh emotionally. This isn't a sermon or a moral debate. This is procedure. Location confirmed, behavior observed, options limited. The badge doesn't care who the man is or where he preaches on Sunday. On this camera, everyone is the same size. The pastor tries to speak, his tone shifting, polite, almost familiar, like he's searching for footing that no longer exists. But the process moves forward anyway. A summons is prepared, instructions are given, questions are answered with practiced neutrality. The power has fully changed hands. As the officer explains what will happen next, the camera keeps recording. Every adjustment of clothing, every measured breath, every second of silence that feels heavier than any accusation. And yet, for all the damage done in these few minutes, this was only the beginning. Because once the footage left the park and entered the public eye, the fallout didn't slow down, it multiplied. But this moment was only the spark. The fire came later. Before a police body cam reduced him to a few uncomfortable minutes of footage, Aaron Williams Jr. was known for something very different. In Mansfield, Ohio, his name carried weight, especially inside the walls of Maddox Memorial Church. He wasn't just another face at the pulpit. He was presented as a continuation of a legacy, the son of the church's late pastor, someone expected to protect what had been built before him. On Sundays, he spoke with confidence and familiarity, addressing a congregation that trusted him not only with scripture, but with guidance. He was described publicly as a devoted husband, a proud father to 3 daughters, and a man whose life revolved around faith, family, and service. Those closest to the church saw him as steady, someone who showed up, participated, and knew how to speak when eyes were on him. Outside the sanctuary, his resume expanded. A Gulf War veteran, he carried the credibility that comes with service. In the community, that mattered. It added to the image of discipline, responsibility, and sacrifice. These weren't just labels. They were part of how he was introduced, how people explained who he was to others. That confidence followed him beyond church life. Williams had political ambitions too. In 2024, he stepped into the public arena, running for Richland County Commissioner as a Democratic candidate. He didn't win, but he didn't disappear either. Even in defeat, he presented himself as approachable, cordial, someone willing to share a meal with an opponent after the race was over. To supporters, that reinforced the idea that he was reasonable, grounded, and capable of leadership beyond the pulpit. What made his image so durable wasn't perfection, it was relatability. He never claimed to be flawless. In fact, he often spoke about humility, about acknowledging personal shortcomings while striving to do better. To many, that honesty made him more believable, not less. It suggested self-awareness, growth, which is why the contrast mattered. The words he preached about responsibility, self-control, and conduct weren't abstract concepts. They were expectations people believed he lived by. He was someone who asked others to reflect on their choices, while standing as proof that reflection mattered. So when the footage surfaced, it didn't just show a man caught in a bad decision. It showed a collision between who people thought he was and what the camera revealed in seconds. Titles didn't vanish, but they stopped protecting him. Respect didn't disappear, but it no longer shielded him. And that reputation, the one built over years of sermons, service, and public appearances, is exactly why what happened next hit harder. What made this moment harder to explain wasn't what happened, it was where it happened. A public park, open space, daylight. Not a secluded lot or a place designed for privacy, just a location where families pass through, where anyone can wander by without warning. That choice alone raised the question no one could ignore. Why here? The answer isn't found in impulse alone, it's found in a chain of decisions that grows quietly over time. Secrecy has a way of creating its own logic. Each successful moment without consequence reinforces the next. One risk taken without exposure makes the following risk feel smaller. Familiar places begin to feel safer, not because they are, but because nothing has gone wrong yet. There's also entitlement layered into that thinking. When someone is used to being recognized, respected, and deferred to, the rules start to feel flexible. Not invisible, but negotiable. The park wasn't chosen because it was hidden. It was chosen because it felt ordinary. And ordinary can create the illusion that nothing out of the ordinary will happen. That illusion is powerful. It convinces people they can blend into plain sight, that being known protects them. That authority follows them even when they step outside the roles they're expected to play. The risk doesn't feel reckless in the moment, it feels controlled. But that sense of control is fragile. All it takes is one interruption. The decision chain didn't end with getting into the car. It continued with staying, with not leaving, with assuming time was on their side, with believing that even if someone noticed, the outcome wouldn't be severe. That belief is where the calculation failed, because the presence of authority doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, observes, and records. And once that happens, the story stops belonging to the people inside the car. This is where the psychology shifts. People in positions of influence don't usually think they won't be caught. They think if they are, the situation will bend in their favor. That conversations can be had. That explanations will matter. That who they are will soften what they've done. In that park, those assumptions collapsed in real time. A routine patrol crossed paths with a moment that couldn't be ignored. The setting that once felt harmless turned into the worst possible stage. No walls, no distance, no discretion. just exposure. And once that exposure occurred, there was no way to rewind the decision that led there. The park wasn't just a backdrop. It was the reason the moment became unavoidable. What followed proved that the real consequences weren't born in that car, but in how the world responded after seeing it. Once the body cam footage made its way into official reports, the situation moved from embarrassment to formal consequence. Aaron Williams Jr. was charged with public indecency for engaging in a sexual act in a public park. The woman with him was charged as well. The allegation was straightforward, rooted in what officers observed firsthand. There was no dispute about the location, no confusion about visibility, and no question that the act had taken place where it shouldn't have. But Williams' response shifted the story in a different direction. He entered a plea of not guilty. From the outside, that decision surprised many, not because the charge was severe, but because the evidence appeared plain. Still, the plea wasn't framed as denial of imperfection. Instead, it was framed as resistance to what he believed was an unfair narrative forming around him. In statements that followed, he did not express regret for the situation itself. He challenged how it was being interpreted. His language was careful. He acknowledged that he was not without flaws, but he stopped short of accepting responsibility for the incident. Rather than focusing on the act, he redirected attention toward the reaction. He argued that churches were often targeted, that people were too quick to assign blame when a religious leader was involved. The problem, in his view, wasn't what happened. It was how eagerly others seized on it. That shift mattered. By positioning himself as the subject of excessive scrutiny, he reframed the conversation away from personal conduct and toward perceived persecution. He suggested that the response had less to do with the facts and more to do with who he was. He even raised the possibility of political motives, questioning whether his recent run for office had placed a target on his back. What stood out wasn't just what he said, but what he didn't say. There was no acknowledgement that the setting alone made the behavior unacceptable. No recognition of the breach of trust felt by the people who looked to him for guidance. The focus remained external: critics, motives, public reaction. To some, this sounded like self-defense. To others, it felt like avoidance. As debate grew, attention shifted from the charge itself to his refusal to own it. People weren't just asking whether he had broken the law. They were asking whether he understood why the moment mattered at all. And while court proceedings would eventually deliver an answer on paper, the response that stunned the public most didn't come from a judge. Because the legal outcome wasn't the moment that shocked people the most. Up to this point, many people assumed the story would follow a familiar path. A public scandal, a quiet absence, distance, silence, maybe separation, maybe resignation. That expectation settled in quickly, almost automatically. Then the church doors opened, not for a statement issued through an attorney, not for a carefully worded apology, but for a service. When Aaron Williams Jr. returned to church activity, he didn't stand alone, he stood beside his wife. And that single image immediately rewrote the emotional direction of the story. What people thought they were about to witness, and what they actually saw, didn't line up. She stepped forward publicly, addressing the congregation with composure and confidence. Her voice was steady. There was no visible anger, no public rebuke, no distancing language. Instead, she spoke about gratitude, about being able to enter a place of worship, about encouragement, about support. Her words were directed outward, to the church family, to visiting pastors, to those who had shown them care during what she described as a difficult season. What followed was not confrontation, but affirmation. She thanked leaders who stood by them, acknowledged friends who checked in, recognized people who helped keep things moving when they could have stepped away. Again and again, the emphasis returned to togetherness, to faith, to continuity. The congregation responded in kind. Applause, amens, standing support. Not the uneasy quiet some expected, but visible unity. The atmosphere suggested something closer to restoration than rupture. That response unsettled many watching from the outside. Because the public had already filled in the blanks, they expected withdrawal, consequences expressed in isolation. Instead, what they saw was a community closing ranks, choosing presence over distance. Whether that choice felt comforting or disturbing depended entirely on the viewer. Then Aaron Williams Jr. spoke. He echoed much of what his wife had said. Gratitude, support, appreciation for leadership that had not abandoned him. He spoke about being encouraged when he wasn't sure of himself, about people who helped him keep his footing during transition. There was emotion, but it wasn't framed as confession. It was framed as survival. The contrast was sharp. Just days earlier, he was standing half-dressed in a public park, answering questions he couldn't control. Now, he was back at a podium, surrounded by allies, speaking to an audience that chose to remain. This wasn't the resolution people anticipated. It was more complicated, more uncomfortable. It forced viewers to sit with questions instead of answers, about loyalty, about forgiveness, about whether public accountability and private reconciliation have to follow the same timeline or the same rules. And this is where the story stopped being just about a charge or a camera angle. It became about perception, about how communities respond when the person in the center isn't a stranger, but one of their own. So pause for a second. What would you have done in her position? Would you have stepped forward or stepped away? Comment your honest thoughts. Because as the legal process continued quietly in the background, the emotional impact of this moment was already reshaping how the entire case would be remembered. When the case reached its conclusion in court, the outcome was far less dramatic than the public reaction that had already unfolded. There were no lengthy arguments, no spectacle. The facts were narrow, and the charge was specific. After review, Aaron Williams Jr. was found guilty of public indecency for engaging in a sexual act in a public park. The sentence reflected the limited scope of the charge. He received a 30-day jail sentence, but it was suspended. The condition was clear: no further violations within Richland County for a set period. In addition, he was fined $50 and ordered to pay court costs. On paper, the punishment was modest, brief, conditional, and largely symbolic. Legally, the matter was resolved. But the courtroom could only address what fell within its authority. It could issue a ruling, set conditions, and close the case. What it could not measure was the broader cost that had already been paid. By the time the verdict was handed down, the damage to his public image had long since occurred. The footage had circulated. The discussions had already taken shape. Opinions were formed before the judge spoke a word. For many, the sentence felt disconnected from the weight of the moment that had placed him there in the first place. The law punished the act itself, nothing more. It did not account for broken trust, shaken faith, or the strain placed on relationships that extended far beyond the courtroom. It did not address the questions raised inside the church or the conversations happening in homes and online spaces. And that distinction mattered, because while the court treated the case as a misdemeanor with defined boundaries, the public viewed it through a different lens. One shaped by expectation, disappointment, and the uncomfortable reality of seeing someone fall short of the standards they once represented. In the end, the legal system did what it was designed to do. It closed a case. What it could not do was close the conversation. That part was left to everyone else, and it was far from over. Stories like this linger not because of what was caught on camera, but because of what it forces people to confront afterward. The facts are limited. The footage is brief. Yet the reaction stretches far beyond those few minutes, touching something deeper about authority and expectation. When someone holds power, especially moral authority, there is an unspoken agreement with the people who trust them. That power isn't enforced by law alone. It's reinforced by belief, and belief changes the stakes. A mistake made by a stranger is one thing. A mistake made by someone who teaches others how to live carries a different weight. That's why accountability becomes complicated. The legal system handled what it could. But authority built on respect doesn't dissolve with a sentence or a fine. It shifts into questions the court can't answer. Should forgiveness be immediate, or should it follow acknowledgement? Can support exist without accountability? And who gets to decide when enough has been done? Public forgiveness is often visible. It's expressed through statements, appearances, and gestures of unity. Private trust, however, is quieter and harder to restore. It's rebuilt in conversations that aren't recorded, in moments that don't make headlines. Those two timelines rarely move at the same speed. Then there's image. Public figures learn how to speak, how to stand, how to reassure. Those skills can comfort people or confuse them. When someone responds to exposure by managing perception instead of confronting behavior, it creates a gap. Not everyone interprets that gap the same way. Some see resilience, others see avoidance. Scandals involving moral leaders cut deeper because they challenge the idea that guidance and example move together. When the person offering direction stumbles publicly, it forces others to separate the message from the messenger. That separation isn't easy, and it isn't clean. So the questions remain. Is accountability measured by punishment or by acknowledgement? Does forgiveness require transparency or simply time? Can a community support someone without dismissing the harm done? And when authority is shaken, who carries the responsibility to repair what breaks? There are no final answers here. Only tension. Tension between grace and consequence, between loyalty and expectation, between what people want to believe and what they've seen. And maybe that discomfort is the point. Because stories like this don't exist to settle debates. They exist to expose them. When everything settles, after the footage, the charges, the speeches, and the verdict, what's left isn't outrage, it's uncertainty. The kind that doesn't resolve neatly because the story itself never offered a clean line between right and wrong outcomes. Was justice served? On paper, the answer is simple. The court delivered a ruling, imposed conditions, and closed the case. The law addressed the act it was designed to address. But justice, in the way people feel it, doesn't always align with what's written in a sentence or a fine. For some, the punishment felt sufficient. For others, it felt disconnected from the trust that was broken. Then there's forgiveness. Public forgiveness arrived quickly and visibly. It was spoken out loud, shared from a pulpit, reinforced by applause. But forgiveness without accountability raises a quieter question. Does it heal, or does it bypass something that still needs to be faced? And who benefits most when that step is skipped? The cost to the faith community is harder to measure. Not everyone watching felt represented by what they saw. Some were comforted by unity. Others felt conflicted, torn between loyalty and disappointment. For those who look to leadership for guidance, the moment forced reflection on where faith is placed, in the message or in the person delivering it. And then there is the silence. The woman involved in the incident remains largely outside the conversation, charged, processed, and then faded into the background. Her voice absent, her perspective unknown. The story moves on without her, leaving another gap, one that never quite closes. What lingers isn't a verdict or a headline, it's the discomfort of unresolved questions. About standards, about grace, about how communities decide what matters most when the person at the center is someone they know. And maybe the most unsettling part is this: the story doesn't tell you what to think. It simply leaves you sitting with it, long after the camera stops recording. In the end, this story doesn't conclude with a dramatic fall or a triumphant recovery. It ends in a space far more familiar and far more uncomfortable. A space where consequences exist, but clarity does not. Aaron Williams Jr. will always be associated with two images that cannot be separated. One is the image carefully built over years, standing before a congregation, speaking with conviction, representing stability and faith. The other lasts only a few minutes, recorded without intention or control, yet powerful enough to reshape everything that came after. Neither image erases the other. They now exist side by side. What unfolded wasn't just about a charge or a sentence. It was about how quickly trust can be tested, how differently people respond when belief is challenged, and how communities decide what they are willing to carry together. Some saw resilience. Some saw denial. Others saw something in between. The story doesn't ask you to condemn or defend. It asks you to notice. To consider how authority works when it's no longer abstract, how forgiveness feels when it arrives publicly, and how accountability matters, even when it's inconvenient. If this story stayed with you, share it, because stories like this force conversations many people would rather avoid. And tell me, do you believe forgiveness should come before accountability or after? Your perspective matters here. Not because it will change the outcome, but because these are the questions that don't disappear when the case file closes. Thank you for watching True Crime Stories Chronicles. Stay aware, stay thoughtful, and we'll see you in the next story.